G'day there, I'm David Lipson. Tonight, what if you could cheat death by freezing your body for the future? We meet the Australians putting their faith in cryonics in the hope of bringing the dead back to life.
Predictions about the future always seem crazy. Any predictions that you make about the future, if they're going to be at all likely of coming true, then they're always going to sound crazy.
That story on the Cryonics lab soon, and we are streaming on Facebook for that if you want to jump on and comment. In the words of the New Testament, death comes to everyone, but what if you could be revived to live again? 50 years ago, a retired psychology professor in California became the first person to be cryogenically preserved in the hope of one day being brought back to life. Since then, hundreds of people have been frozen after death in the US and in Russia. Well, now an Australian group is planning to build the Southern Hemisphere's first cryonics facility. Barbara Miller reports.
Welcome to Life Extension. Life Extension, or LE as we like to refer to it, is a glimpse of the future. It's a ticket.
Do you think he's dead?
Jim, you're gonna want to see this.
Sir, we got a malfunction on one of Strickland's cylinders. He's thawing fast.
The ultimate gentleman spy, irresistible to women, deadly to his enemies, a legend in his own time.
What did you think when you first heard about it?
I laughed.
Why?
Oh, Wally's think rich people think they can live forever. Just people wasting money. I think it's up to $90,000 a skiff now. So I'd laugh. Like most Australians, you'd laugh at something like that.
It's going to bring, I reckon, it'll bring more people to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be the only ones on the Southern Hemisphere with it.
It's not for me, but I'm accepting of the fact that some people are very interested in that sort of thing, and I've got an open mind about it. The application was very good. They'd done all their homework, they'd covered all the bases that they needed to cover that we as local government needed to have considered. Well, I must say it was something that I knew about, but I'd never thought would ever happen, certainly not in Greater Hume Shire.
As an investor, I'm signed up to be preserved, and that's what investment in this company gets you. There's no financial return. We're a non-profit. It's just sort of a prepayment for your own suspension.
I just think, why not give it a shot? You know, what can you lose, basically? A bit of cash, basically.
Right, so here we are on the block.
So the block extends all the way from the road.
All the way from the road.
And how
to the
far back
trees
to
there?
All the trees?
Yep. So look here. The warehouse is just going to go here. We've tried to think ahead there, like you'll be able to get a patient on a trolley through the roller door without any trouble, and then you've got the alternate access to the warehouse through the meeting room.
Yeah, and I mean that looks really nice. I mean, it needs to be aesthetically pleasing for the visitors that are going to be coming. So that looks really nice. I think the designer's done a really good job with that.
possibility using current technology of successfully freezing a body so that can be brought back to life in the future is 0. We can freeze red blood cells in isolation, we can freeze white blood cells in isolation, things like that, but we can't actually freeze even simple tissue without all the cells dying. So the idea we can freeze a human body, which has hundreds of different types of tissue, all using the same conditions, is fanciful.
Predictions about the future always seem crazy. Any predictions that you make about the future, if they're going to be at all likely of coming true, then they're always going to sound crazy.
This is where it all happens, basically. The person has been declared clinically dead, the death certificate's been issued, they've had their they've had ice packs around their head to cool them down in a preliminary way, then they've been shifted into a cold room, and then they finally end up here, and that gives you access to the skull and the skin so that the incisions can be made around and across the top of the skull. People who are whole body frozen in the cryonic sense definitely do want to get revived in the future, but someone who only freezes their brain is possibly only doing it to preserve the information that's in their brain for historical posterity, but it might be just a bonus if they get revived in a synthetic or virtual body, or even a new biological body, for example.
Does it make it in any way easier to deal with the death of your parents, this thought that some part of them may come back?
It certainly does. I mean, Mum and Dad gave me a life, and I feel like I might, with a bit of luck, be able to give them another life.
Well, it was the most I could possibly do to keep him around. As a result, he has some chance, don't know how big or how small, of seeing the other side of this transition that I talk about. And if I'd done less than everything I could, I think I'd always regret it if everything that I'm picturing actually comes to pass.
I'm a bit of a cynic. I'm in the camp that thinks that once you're dead, you're dead. And if there was any evidence that you could bring people back to life, somebody would have brought a mouse or a gnat or a fly or something back to life.
Well, it's really just a technical problem at this point. There are people alive today who were frozen as embryos at the temperatures we were talking about, and then, implanted, brought to term, and are happily walking around, living their lives. So we've already done it with humans, we just need to do it with fully grown humans.
What do you think about the fact that this is going to be really close within sight of the cemetery?
Look, I think it's just a coincidence. It just sort of, I don't know, is it a neat fit? You just sort of think about it and think, well, maybe that's where everybody needs to be in the end, all up in that area of town.
Doesn't look like much now, does it?
Well, there's not a lot here yet, but there will be soon.
And what do you think about the fact that, I mean, if all goes to plan, you yourself at some point would end up here in suspended animation.
Oh, it's so peaceful out here. I think it's a really nice place to take a break for a while.
For a while?
Well, however long it takes.
And why not? I mean, you got the cemetery literally just over there. What's wrong with that?
People don't walk out of there.
Well, to discuss the ethical and legal issues around cryonics, I was joined earlier by Dr. Neera Bhatia, a senior lecturer in law at Deakin University in Melbourne, and Marta Sandberg in Bunbury. She had her husband frozen and plans to do the same after her death. Marta, Neera, thank you both so much for joining us. I want to start with you, Marta. I have to admit, I did begin reading your story with a great deal of scepticism, but by the end of your personal account, I really had, if you like, warmed up my cold heart and was almost shedding a tear. In a nutshell, it seemed like you wanted to freeze yourself for love.
I wanted to freeze myself. I want to freeze Helmer for love, my husband for love. I want to freeze myself for love of Helmer, but also because I love living. And I'm not ready to die, and Helmer wasn't ready to die. Like you, I was incredibly skeptical when I first heard about it, and I thought I could dismiss it after just a little bit of research. It took 3 years. I went through every scientific journal I can find. I studied an enormous amount, and I could not dismiss it as stupidity.
Your husband was terminally ill, and
he had a brain tumour
and passed away in '94, I think. But
yes,
it took some convincing for you to convince him that this was the right course of action. He said, quote, that he didn't want to do a backroom deal with death.
No, he was fighting death on an almost daily basis. It took me 3 years to convince myself. It took almost as long to convince my husband. In the end, he did it because he knew how much it meant to me that we have a chance of meeting together and being together. And in the end, he believed in it just as much as I do. He refused to say goodbye. He refused to let me say goodbye. He only said au revoir. And one day, God willing, we will meet again.
And a formative experience for you, Marta, was when your husband was on life support and he was actually declared brain dead. They were going to turn off his life support, but he came back. That must have been an incredibly important moment for you. Do you now accept that your husband has passed away?
Of course he's dead. He's not there. He hasn't been there for 20 years. He won't be there for the next 20, 25 years I'm living. But it may not be permanent. And that's something very hard to think about when you think about cryonics, when outsider thinks about cryonics. I can grieve. I grieved as hard for Helmer as I grieve for anyone else. But unlike most grieving, which is tinged with hopelessness, there is a possibility that we will meet again. It takes away some of the futility of death.
Neera Bhatia, there are no laws against cryonics. Should there be?
You're right, there are no laws, there is no legislation that governs cryonics. It is an unregulated area of law. As Marta has pointed out, it is an area of technology and medicine and science that is really working on this whole premise that is essentially working on possibility rather than probability.
And is there then a fear in your mind that people could be exploited?
Yes, this is an issue that we need to consider, and that is potential exploitation of the vulnerable. I think people need to be aware of the risk that they may not come back to life in the future.
And Marta, you're clearly very aware of that risk.
It is something which every cryonic organisation makes extremely clear. And unlike most things which is heavily advertised, it isn't easy to sign up for cryonics. You have to be aware of what you're doing. You have to be aware of what you're trying. Nobody is trying to push people into cryonics. Nobody makes money out of cryonics. It is a group of people who are trying to do something really serious. We are trying to actually challenge death. When nothing else is available, we are a possibility. That's what we hope to do.
Neera, I do want to ask you about another area I found very interesting that you wrote about, and that's in regards to natural justice and whether we have an obligation as human beings, as a collective of human beings, to live and then die and then hand this earth, this universe over to the next generation.
I think we do. I think we need to consider what is fair innings. Do we have an obligation to turn the world over to the next generation? What is fair innings? Should people live indefinitely? There are also other practical considerations we need to think about. If a cryonics centre were to cease working, or they were to come into financial difficulties, what would then happen to those bodies? These are things that we need to consider. And let's just think for a moment, let's say that cryonics is to be successful in the future. What then happens to a person that is reanimated? What kind of world are they going to re-enter? It's going to be a completely different world. It's going to be radically different. They will not have, or may not have, any family or support network available to them. They may not have any resources available to them. Is the company going to be able to keep a record or be able to trace any descendants that they have? These are all questions that remain unanswered that we don't have any answers to right now.
Marta, do you see anything unnatural or selfish about your decision to reject the concept that we're all here for a short time on Earth to pass on this world to the next generation?
I have no doubt that I am going to die. I'm going to die permanently one day. I'm going to choose to die permanently one day. But I don't want that decision to be determined by a cell turning cancerous, or like it did in my husband's case. I want to be able to choose when I die, just like we nowadays choose when we start a life. Why can't we choose when we end it? It changed society a great deal when we no longer just willy-nilly became pregnant. We are planning families. It will change society when we start planning for our death. But I don't see anything wrong with that. Is there anything wrong with penicillin? Is there anything wrong with all the life-extending technology we have now, where we are young and expect until we, I'm young, I'm in my 60s, I expect to live for another 20, 25 years. That was not available to my grandparents.
I want to read you an email from Benita Spies, who said cryonic life extension will never work because the energy body, or the aura, leaves the vessel at death and cannot be revived. Have you considered that? I mean, Marta, do you not believe that we have a spirit, or what do you think happens there?
I'm not sure if I got an energy aura, but if you're talking about my soul, and if you're talking about God, quite frankly, I'm not telling God what is possible and not possible. I don't know what is going to happen. I don't know if God doesn't want this to happen. Then it doesn't happen. But I can only try my best. I'm not telling God what to believe.
All right, well, Neera and Marta, thank you both so much for joining us. A fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It sure was, and that's all for Late Line. You can find tonight's stories and all of the interviews on our website. We'll see you again tomorrow.